Well, we're almost there, the release of God's Not Dead 5, but, I feel a little dishonest. Lying is a sin after all, and can I really go watch God's Not Dead 5 if I haven't seen the 4 previous God's Not Dead movies? So, I took 7 hours out of my life to watch all 4 God's Not Dead movies back to back to back to back in an experience that I can only compare to having sleep paralysis in a church full of morons. None of the movies were any good, and by the end, I was wishing for my own salvation. I have very low expectations for Christian cinema, just as I do for Christian rock, and while both may occasionally surprise me, for the most part, I remain sitting in my chair, homosexual, and unimpressed. And as I was fully immersed in the world of God's Not Dead, I was taken aback by just how little creativity and, dare I say, inspiration goes into these movies and making these movies stand out by themselves as pieces of competent cinema. To illustrate what I mean and to offer my own criticism, I'm going to take this movie to go into all 4 of the previous God's Not Dead movies and, maybe cry a little. And because this is a long video, I will have timestamps in the description. My name is Patrick, but my friends call me Pat, and before I endeavor on this Herculean undertaking, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. This video took so long to put together and drained me of a lot of sanity. So if you like my videos and you like my content, subscribe. It's free. Only this many of you are subscribed. That's a pretty low number, and more likes and comments help get this video out to more people. Thank you all so much. Heart. Before we begin our pilgrimage, that will be the last Christian pun we'll do for the duration of this video. Actually, that's a lie. I can't promise that. We've got a long way to go, but let's talk about why this series even exists in the first place. The original movie and breakout success, and to date still most successful film, God's Not Dead, was released in 2014, named after a book with the same title. The author of that book, as well as another one called Man, Myth, Messiah, both of which make cameos in the film, wrote these books in an effort to provide a blueprint as to how to defend Christianity's existence in the modern world. And not for nothing, but I think Man, Myth, Messiah would make a truly legendary tramp stamp. Brooks argues that God is real, everything that happened in the Bible is real, and that's more or less what we're going to be dealing with for the next 7 hours. Or what, I'm going to be dealing with, and I'm going to distill immensely for your benefit for the next however long this video is. And if those things aren't what you believe, well, get ready to have that force fed down your throat over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. There are other issues with the franchise beyond just its incredibly overhanded, incredibly domineering Christian preaching philosophy, namely bad filmmaking, but that is kind of problem 1. It's propaganda for people who already believe everything that the movie is going to spend 2 hours telling you over and over again. The title of Brooks's book, God's Not Dead, was actually inspired by a 2012 rock song of the same name by the Newsboys, who actually show up in all the movies and at one point use the power of prayer to get rid of a woman's cancer. So yes, that's what we're going to be dealing with. I can't play the song because copyright on songs is awful, but here's reaction footage of me jamming out to the concert they did in the first movie.
Roaring like a lion, God's not dead, he's surely alive. One thing I will not dispute about this movie is that the song is a banger.
I'll occasionally be cutting to my reactions while I was watching these, most of them for the first time, so if you want to watch me almost cry, this video is probably going to be your best bet. The original God's Not Dead was an overwhelming financial success, which is a sentence that really pains me to say. But that's okay, because the more successful they are, the more of them will get made, and the more of them will therefore exist for me to make fun of. And, really, that's worth more to me than the $36 plus fees I'm gonna have to spend to see God's Not Dead 5 this weekend. I didn't need to buy groceries this week anyway, because I'm gonna go into that Cinemaplex and I'm gonna get food for the soul. The original grossed nearly $65 million on a $2 million budget, being created by the production company Pureflix. Now renamed to Pinnacle Pictures, it was founded by the late Russell Wolfe and David A.R. White, who also stars as the semi-main character throughout all 4 movies. White is in all of the movies, playing more of a supporting role in the first and second before going to be a main character in the third and fourth as Reverend/Pastor Dave. They use those titles kind of interchangeably, which is one of the only other things that is consistent throughout all the movies. And I honestly really don't think he's that bad of an actor. Like, early on in his career, he was getting some mainstream credits like Melrose Place and Evening Shade, but, now he's into the whole Christian movie circuit, and I feel like that's kind of like a vortex. Once you get sucked in, you never really come back out. And I'd maybe cut him some slack for all the horrible dialogue he has to read throughout the series if he was not literally one of the producers and, quite literally, signing the checks for the writers. So in the spirit of Christian honesty, I actually had watched the original God's Not Dead coming into this video. It was actually one of the first movies I ever reviewed back when I had a blog. And maybe this will come as a shock to you, but I didn't have a positive impression then, and I don't have a positive impression now. The main plot of the first movie revolves around a naive college student played by Harper, best known for being the boyfriend from Good Luck Charlie, trying to defend the existence of God to his philosophy professor, portrayed by Kevin Sorbo. Years ago when I wrote that first review, I dwelled upon the fundamental comedy of a Disney Channel star going on to be a right-wing actor. However, I feel like both the salience of that point as well as the relevance of Good Luck Charlie have both declined quite a lot in the last few years. And apparently it's becoming somewhat common because Justin from Wizards of Waverly Place was in the Reagan movie and now is very Catholic, living in Idaho, which is somewhat fitting because his mother from Wizards of Waverly Place will be making an appearance in the second God's Not Dead movie, so stay tuned for that. She has some lines. They're not good lines, they're lines. But God's Not Dead 1, more so than any of the other movies, suffers from severe plot bloat. Each of the movies does something wrong. They're like the Three Little Pigs, if there were 4 of them, and if they all got eaten in the end of the story. But the biggest failure of the first movie by far is its incredibly stuffed ensemble cast, to the point where multiple stories really don't get proper resolutions at all. But that's okay, because we've decided to create a Christian cinematic universe, we can just save some of these plot lines to be resolved in the 4th movie. No, I'm not joking, that is literally what happens. I'd say it could be a fun drinking game if we took a shot every time one of these movies leaves a plotline completely unresolved, like a sophomore writing a script in film school, but we would all die. So let's not do that. We begin this movie and we enter the world of college freshman Josh Wheaton, who, while I was watching the movie, I occasionally referred to as Will Wheaton, mostly as a function of apathy. He's signed up to take a philosophy class with noted Christian hater Jeffrey Radisson, who from this point forward I will be exclusively referring to as Kevin Sorbo.
Oh, a lowercase g. Maybe this one ought to get extra credit.
I mean, we learn his motivations later in the movie, but, like, it is insane how cartoonishly evil this guy comes across.
Professor Kevin Sorbo on the first day asks all of his students to sign on a sheet of paper that God is dead, because that's what we do in philosophy class, but our erstwhile conservative hero Josh proudly and boldly refuses to sign. So, of course, Professor Sorbo challenges him to a 3-debate/lecture series where he has to prove the existence of God. And at the end of those 3 debates, the class then has to vote whether or not they believe that God is dead. And if Josh loses, he is going to lose 33% of his final grade, likely failing the class. There is so much to get into here. This could make an entire video on itself, and we still have 3 other movies to get to, and like 90 other characters in this movie, so I'll try to be brief. But the premise of this movie is completely moronic, a sentence you may hear me say for literally all 3 of the other movies as well. This movie also showcases their favorite type of character, a cartoonish, unrealistic, and borderline ironically rootable atheist villain. Kevin Sorbo's character is unlike someone I've ever even seen, not just in real life, but on the internet. His character is so extreme that even the most ardent Reddit atheist would be like, dude, you know, I know we're not into this whole God thing, but you need to take a chill pill. Or if we're gonna do a Reddit joke, let's do a Reddit joke. Dude, I'm never not into God, but you need to take a chill pill. He quotes Macbeth and Socrates in the original Greek.
Life is really a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury and
That's cringe.
nothing.
That's cringe, dog. What is this? A 10th grade English class?
And he belittles his Christian wife. It is truly beyond parody. It's in this depiction of completely cartoonish villainy that this movie attempts to find the moral high ground, but in actuality, it only finds that they have created one of 2 interesting characters in this entire 4-movie franchise. Anyways, briefly, onto those other 90 characters. A liberal journalist named Amy, who's acting all smug, maybe not unlike me, until she gets cancer. This plotline leads to quite a few hilarious scenes and a lot of thematic inconsistency, and isn't that what Christian cinema is all about? There's also Martin, a Chinese exchange student who gets really into Christianity against the wishes of his father, in a way that doesn't ever really feel relevant, but we'll get back to that one. Kevin Sorbo's girlfriend Mina, who is a Christian, is dealing with her mother who has dementia, and she is not being helped at all by her lawyer brother Mark. And Mark is dating Amy until Mark finds out that Amy has cancer. And for some reason, some of the family from Duck Dynasty is also in this movie, which I remember feeling incredibly relevant at the time, but now just feels incredibly dated. There's also Reverend Dave and Reverend Jude, who both keep trying to get to Disney World, but they can't because their cars won't start.
We're not.
Oh, and Aisha, who was raised in a Muslim household but is now becoming a Christian. And if this all is starting to sound a little exhausting to you, how do you think I felt watching the movie? This movie is trying to juggle as many plot lines as a drunk clown is trying to juggle balls, ultimately dropping them all and disappointing all the parents and all the children. Most of the movie is structured around Josh's debates with Kevin Sorbo's character about God, where, frankly, they don't convince me that God is real, nor the fact that he isn't. Honestly, they both do a pretty poor job. It's presented to us as something that has pretty high stakes, with Josh eventually wanting to go to law school, but Kevin Sorbo threatening to destroy him and make sure he never gets in if he continues these debates, which is a little bit weird because Kevin Sorbo is the person who made him do these debates in the first place, and then he basically tries to threaten him and get him to back off, but obviously he doesn't because, you know, this is a Christian movie. His girlfriend of 6 years, who he met at a church group at a Newsboys concert, remember them, even breaks up with him because he refuses to drop out of the class and switch sections. And look, I know you love God or whatever, but no self-respecting future lawyer would ever risk failing an intro to philosophy class just to prove a point, even if that point was for the big man upstairs, JC.
He's the son of the original G, and he was sent to Earth to elucidate the way that we should be. What?
Like, I'm sure he would understand if you switch sections, graduated college, went to law school, passed the bar, and then went on to be a lawyer for a megachurch and maintain their tax-exempt status as they go on to buy 2 private jets. Especially because, let's just say Josh wins, guess which vindictive motherfucker is going to be grading your midterm and your final essay? It's still gonna be this guy. And while the scenes of Kevin Sorbo physically accosting Josh were pretty fun to watch, they generally were not reflective of my personal experience in higher education. I honestly do not believe that most philosophy professors are such ardent atheists that they would relish the attempts to try to humiliate a college freshman in a lecture series. Especially given this movie was shot in Louisiana and presumably depicts a college that exists somewhere in the South. Josh even goes to David A.H. White's character, Reverend Dave, in an attempt to get some advice, where Reverend Dave basically just quotes 2 passages from the Bible to him and tells him to f*** off.
It's not easy, but it's simple.
I'm assuming this wasn't their intention, but all of the church employees come across as very lazy and very honestly annoyed when someone asks them to do their job. Ugh, coming up to me, a spiritual guide, looking for spiritual guidance? Here's a section of Luke you can read now. F*** off, I have to go mew in my tax-exempt cathedral in peace. Although in fairness, since his entire plot in this movie is him trying to get to Disney World and not being able to, I would be a little upset too. He eventually prays hard enough and his car starts, and he and Reverend Jude go off about on their merry way. And here's another piece of unsolicited life advice. If your car is barely starting and then it starts, you probably shouldn't go off on a 12-hour road trip because you could get stranded on the highway and something could go wrong, and then this could happen. And moving on to Aisha, the Muslim character who is now becoming a Christian, she gets kicked out of the house and beaten by her father. I imagine it's pretty hard to do a tasteful father beating his daughter scene, but this movie, let's just say, is not up for the task. If your ideal father beating his daughter scene involves slow motion, start the f*** over. And Martin decides he has found the Christian Lord and decides to become one of Josh's biggest stands, and that's kind of how that plotline wraps up. This plot really does feel like an afterthought, but like any good Marvel fan, I'll assume that they're building up to an endgame-like conclusion to his story arc in God's Not Dead 4. Amy, the lowly liberal filth blogger, decides to renounce her atheist ways after she gets cancer, and she's broken up with by the asshole lawyer character. That moment, as is true with a lot of moments throughout this franchise, provide great accidental comedy.
I've just been named partner.
I
Okay.
think I have cancer.
No, you do. Like, you do. There's no thought behind that.
This couldn't wait until tomorrow.
I thought you loved me.
I do, but you're changing our agreement. You're breaking our deal.
You make it sound like a contract negotiation.
Well, what did you think this was?
I thought it was love.
Grow up, Amy.
It's truly a joy when a writer decides to give a character absolutely no depth and says, "Fuck it, you're the villain of a Darmon video."
Seriously? Can't even do one? It makes sense. It's a lot of weight to push up. Congrats. You're the only one who got a 0.
And speaking of characters who come to the light, Josh valiantly beats Kevin Sorbo in the debate by essentially using 5th grade tactics. He gets Kevin Sorbo to admit that he hates God, and then he's like, how can you hate someone that doesn't exist, therefore he exists? And then Kevin's like, and then the class is like, oh, before they stand up, supporting him, saying that he has won the debate.
God is not dead.
That's the name of the movie.
Everybody does this except, and this is the one true gem of comedy amidst a wasteland of one neckbeardy type guy, no offense to you, sir, but he decides he's not convinced. He remains seated, and then the camera kind of pans down so you can't see him. But I love that they, in this entire classroom, decided to have one person not stand up. It's like when dictators will say, hey, the election was fair. I only won 99% of the vote. Therefore, it was totally fair. Buddy, I think there was some foul play. So, why does Kevin Sorbo actually hate God? Well, it turns out that when he was 12, his mother, who was a pretty devout Christian, died of cancer. He then, justifiably I might add, became pretty disillusioned with the whole concept of Christianity and prayer in general. Josh attempts to address this in the classroom debate. He says evil exists in the world because God permits free will, including the free will to do evil, and that once you get to heaven, God will have gotten rid of all the evil, because those who have used their free will to do it won't be there. Which is great. I guess that free will even extends to the cancer cells that totally murked that dude's mom, but whatever, we'll pretend this is a good argument because that's what the movie wants us to do. But despite all of this, by the end of the movie, Kevin Sorbo's character is ready to apologize to his girlfriend, finally find the light, and possibly even become a Christian. So he goes down to the Christian concert in an effort to find his girlfriend and apologize and atone for his actions. So how does the movie reward him? Well, how about I just show you?
No! Oh my god, and they speed off. Oh no.
Yep, he is hit by a car and killed almost instantly, leaving just enough time for Reverend Dave to come along and convert him to Christianity as his lungs are literally filling with blood. And I love this ending for so many reasons. Ironically, but I will list them. It's so vengeful and bitter. So I guess in that way actually quite accurate to the Old Testament God. But the actual meaning of having your antagonist, who's more or less been arguing about the veracity of Christianity for the entire movie, lose, and not only lose, but get killed, is so bizarre. Essentially, join us or die, or join us and you might still die anyway, because you weren't with us to begin with. It also conflicts with the notion that there is a just God, and obviously different sects of Christianity feel differently about it, but this movie very much is trying to put out the message that God is good and everything always works out. How can you argue it's in any way more just for a person who is now trying to atone and be better to be killed by someone running a red light, as opposed to him living, apologizing, and going on to be a better man? It also doesn't do anything to address the actual in-story arguments that Kevin Sorbo's character made, namely the fact that he was disillusioned, that despite the fact his mom was a good person and a good Christian, she died of cancer, when in the same movie, we've got another liberal character who has cancer, and she, spoiler alert for the second movie, eventually gets it cured because she prays with the newsboys. What's the difference between Kevin Sorbo and Amy? Does God have an affinity for uppity liberals rather than pretentious philosophy professors? If that's true, then, maybe I've been a bit harsh on this movie.
Rub-a-dub-dub. Thanks for the grub. Yay, God!
And the final unanswered thread in this movie is Mark.
Oh, hi, Mark.
The terrible lawyer who broke up with his girlfriend who had cancer and then goes to see his mom who has dementia and makes fun of her.
You're the nicest person I know. I am the meanest. You have dementia. My life is perfect.
It's insane, and nothing bad happens to him at all. His mom, who has dementia and doesn't even recognize him, basically says, like, oh, sinners will get their comeuppance in the next life, which, maybe this makes me irrational, but I'd love it if people like this terrible lawyer would get their comeuppance in this life. You're telling me Jesus doesn't know anyone on the American Bar Association? Like he can't put a word in? Anyways, most of our characters in the ensemble all gather at the Newsboys concert at the Staples Center, where we see one of the Duck Dynasty people make an announcement on the big screen. And he's giving an announcement about something that's just happened, so I assume, okay, he's probably going to address the fact that a man was literally just murdered moments ago outside of the venue where the concert was happening and telling us to pray for him or whatever. No, he's actually just going to namelessly praise Josh Wheaton for taking on this atheist professor in his college campus, and then everybody cheers. So, a little bit of a curveball there. Josh gets praised for standing up for Jesus, and then the movie ends and tells everybody, you guys should text everybody you know 3 simple words, God's not dead. A message I did spread and then got left on red. None of the 4 movies are very good, but this is easily the most enjoyable. You're watching a bad movie, you're kind of along for the ride. That's the feeling I got throughout most of this movie. Even though the movie is quite insufferable and obnoxious, and it's one part God is so lovely, and one part God will smite you at any moment if it's convenient for his plan.
I have concepts of a plan.
And by the way, in the process of writing, editing, and filming this video, I do look not just both ways. I look like 5 or 6 times when I'm crossing the street. I'm like, I cannot be hit by a car while I'm making this video. It just can't happen. Killing off Kevin Sorbo was the biggest mistake in this entire franchise, and I dare say that when all is said and done, this will be considered to be the best performance of his career. Yes, I know he used to get mainstream work. I know he was Hercules. This is the best one. Everybody else, well, I would describe the other actors and actresses on the ensemble like I would describe the people who were on the Titanic after the last lifeboat had left. They're trying their best, but they've pretty much been left to drown in the frigid, unforgiving depths of the ocean. Now on to God's Not Dead 2, He's Surely Alive, which is somehow even more stupid than its predecessor. It maintains a lot of the same talent being a truly generous word to describe the people who worked on the initial movie, which obviously makes sense, because the first movie was a commercial success, and so was this one, albeit on a much smaller scale. It only got $25 million as opposed to the $65 from the first one, with almost double the budget at $5 million. But still, if you can turn off your brain and multiply your money by a factor of 5, you're gonna take that every day of the week, and twice on Sundays. This movie focuses on a character by the name of Grace Wesley, portrayed by Melissa Joan Hart, famous for her roles on Sabrina the Teenage Witch and Clarissa Explains It All. Here, playing a teacher, Clarissa has to explain the answer to one of the questions from her students, where one of her students asks, weren't the nonviolent teachings of Gandhi similar to the nonviolent philosophy of Jesus Christ? To which Clarissa explains, yes, because yes is the correct answer. But somehow one of the students starts texting his parents, and all of a sudden Clarissa is having to explain to the court why she is in such deep legal shit. Okay, I'll stop calling her Clarissa now. Her name is Grace. But after the school board had wanted to discipline her and apologize even though she did nothing wrong, now she is in a trial fighting for her life and livelihood. Because this all makes sense, right? Okay, I think out of all the brain-dead premises in this franchise, this by far is the worst. It is moronic. I'm almost out of words here, and I've got so much more words to read, so we've got to keep going. This whole basis of her being put on trial for what she said is absolutely, it has no base in reality, and you can judge for yourself. I'll put up a little clip here showing you what she actually said.
The writer of the Gospel of Matthew records Jesus as saying, "You have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy," which indicates a commitment to nonviolence. Dr. King confirmed the link, describing his inspiration from scripture.
This is the moment the entire movie revolves around, and she said absolutely nothing wrong there, and maybe that's the point. But if you're going to have an entire legal thriller based on this, you need to actually have had her say something genuinely controversial. But nothing of what she said is in any way wrong. Jesus Christ is a real person who really did exist in history and was a prophet whether or not you like it. Yet somehow, we're in Arkansas and she's being taken to trial over this. You know, if you're going to have this plotline, at least pretend to be filming somewhere in the north. Like, I do not believe this happens in Arkansas. Like, I do not believe that this conversation alone was enough for her to be put on trial for insensitive conduct, especially in Arkansas. And also, this whole thing that I basically just said of Jesus Christ is a real person, and she was just answering a question in the context of history, that's treated as like a third act revelation. Like, almost 75% of the way through the movie, she tells her lawyer, be like, well, I'm no lawyer, but Jesus was a real person that existed, didn't he? And then the lawyer's like, ha! Wait, I never thought of that. Like, ugh, it's so stupid. Oh. This is why these movies fall utterly, completely, pathetically flat. Because these movies take place in a parallel universe where Christianity isn't the plurality largest religion in the country, one where people who worship all religions, but especially Christianity, aren't afforded numerous personal and legal freedoms, and one where one of the two major party candidates, but frankly both of them, believe exactly the same things that you believe. School districts in real life are not coming after AP history teachers for teaching history. None of this makes any sense. But if we're being technical, it isn't the school district that's initiating this lawsuit. The school district just wants to discipline her and she doesn't accept that, so they're like, well, you know, what are we gonna do? But then the ACLU, the evil, conniving ACLU, steps in to sue her, and the school district is like, we're gonna abide by what the trial says. So it is, I guess, the ACLU at the crux of this issue as well. And it's all being led by evil ACLU lawyer Peter Kane, played by Ray Wise of Batman and Twin Peaks fame, and there's also just a random Irish guy here for some reason too. He's there as well.
And not forgetting the financial opportunities.
Oh, yes?
Now, Ray Wise is a little bit buried in the credit order, which is unfair because he is actually probably the most interesting part of this movie. Another cartoonish one-note villain like Kevin Sorbo, not quite as high, but a different type of sleazy, so, you know, it's fun to watch. And it bears saying that the ACLU is not an evil boogeyman organization set out to destroy Christians. The opposite, in fact, because the ACLU actually takes on a bunch of cases that increase the religious liberties, not just for Christians, but for people who worship all religions. But if we listen to this movie, Peter Kane, the evil lawyer, just wants to make some money at the expense of a hardworking Christian teacher. He convinces the parents of one of the students in this class to take this case to trial, and that's the crux of our plot. The student in question, Brooke, played by Haley Orancia, most famous for her role in The Goldbergs, she is still suffering from the premature death of her brother. Her parents, one of whom is Maria Canals-Barrera, tell her to just get over it.
Brooke, we're all upset, but we need to move on.
Honey, you're a junior now. It's your make or break year, so there's no room for self-pity.
These are the types of scenes that make me feel better about my own writing because they are a product of true, unadulterated laziness. It is so much more difficult to write an actual compelling villain with multiple dimensions than it is to write a cartoon bad guy, as they've done with her parents here.
Brooke, I'm serious, honey. You need to get focused. Or you could say goodbye, Stanford, hello, somewhere state.
Oh, that's actually really insulting.
Canals-Barrera has clearly regressed in her parenting skills from her time on Waverly Place because she leaves her daughter to just make sure all of her brother's things are donated while she goes off to go do yoga or something. These model parents then get Brooke involved in the trial in an effort to secure money to pay for her college education as well as bolster her application because, you know, elite liberal colleges are godless or something. And it's not really like she needs help to get into college at this point because she has a dead brother. While that's not at the top of the dead relatives list to get you into college, it's close. You know, obviously at the top, that's parents. That's your golden ticket. You know, maybe that's insensitive, but hey, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, you only needed one parent to tour the factory. Oh gosh. And then right below that, I think, is sibling. You know, you knew him your whole life. An inspiration, probably pretty traumatic, could be like a terrible boat accident, you know, we don't know the details. And then at the bottom you got grandparents. Grandparents, they're old by definition, you're not getting into Harvard with a dead grandparent. Sorry to say it. Anyway, most of this movie is a lame legal procedural as Grace and her lawyer navigate Christianity being on trial from the perspective of screenwriters who know very little about legal procedure. Most of my reactions throughout this movie were just me yelling at them to object to various dubious lines of questioning.
Do you feel now that you're a believer?
Yes.
You gotta get that redirect going,
Maybe even
brother.
Christian?
You gotta get that redirect going.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Bro, you gotta get a redirect in there.
Sandler, do you wish to redirect?
No, Your Honor.
What?
You may step down.
What do you mean you're not doing a redirect?
And at one point, Grace's lawyer is reading Martin Luther King Jr.'s letters from a Birmingham jail to the principal of the school. And I don't know what's more insulting, the fact that they're reading this piece of text to a black woman, or the fact that they're just sitting there and making this poor character be like, I'm kind of familiar with it. What is this? I don't know the specifics. As if it's not one of the most influential and important pieces of American writing in the past 100 years, and the fact that she is the principal of a school literally named after Martin Luther King Jr. I'm pretty sure she's familiar with letters from a Birmingham jail, or in a sane movie, in a sane script, she would be pretty familiar. Also, I feel like a lot of principals have like a doctorate. Like, she would know.
Allow me to refresh your memory.
But speaking of the lawyer, move over Anatomy of a Fall, because we have got another hot lawyer on our hands. Or, well, actually, this movie came out before Anatomy of a Fall, so it really has to get out of the way of French heartthrob Swan Arlo. And to be honest with you, Antoine Renat, he wasn't really bad looking either. I feel like he gets overlooked a lot in this discussion. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking about the hot lawyers from Anatomy of a Fall, as long as you promise, after you're done watching this video, to go watch that movie. I'm sorry, thinking about actually competent, good cinema is the only thing that's been getting me through this. God is good, and all the time, God is good. That's like their little Avengers-esque catchphrase they keep saying throughout the entire movie. I'm sure it's a real thing in Christianity, but because it's being said by these characters, it frankly annoys me. Anyway, the hot lawyer was played by Jesse Metcalfe, who was on Desperate Housewives, but now is just desperate for some work as Grace's atheist lawyer. As a former public defender, he's Grace's last chance to save her job, her livelihood, and her reputation, even though the motivations for everyone wanting to destroy her really make no sense. This is also the last movie that really sidelines Reverend Dave, because going forward he's going to be a much larger part of the narrative, but in this movie his main job is to be on the jury of this case until his appendix bursts. He's also there to help Martin from the first movie, who now has decided he is super into Jesus, which leads actually to one of the weirdest scenes in all four of these movies, where his dad, who we've previously only seen him communicate with over the phone, with his dad presumably being in China, his dad comes to America to Martin's dorm room and says, "I'm taking you back," and Martin says no, and the dad is like, okay, and then that's it, then he leaves. You may be left with several questions after that scene, including, but are not limited to, how is Martin going to financially support himself if his dad is presumably no longer paying for his education? What is Martin even studying to begin with? Is Martin going to be transferring to a seminary school to pursue his theocratic education? And if so, how is that going to be paid for? Don't expect answers to any of these questions. If you want to see a movie with setups, payoffs, and resolutions, you will not find it here. Instead, you will find pro-Christian propaganda that borders on the absurd. May I remind you that in this very movie, a formerly liberal blogger's cancer was literally cured by the power of prayer. Anyways, the actual trial is pretty dull. Grace's coworkers go on the stand to basically call her an annoying Christian. And by the way, the movie really misses out by not casting Phyllis Smith from The Office here to portray the almost retired terrible teacher who hates Grace. She would have ate that role up and left absolutely no crumbs.
Close your mouth, sweetie. You look like a trout.
Eventually, they call Brooke to the stand in an attempt to reveal that Grace actually didn't do anything wrong, but then Brooke reveals that Grace had talked to her outside of class about Jesus, which doesn't exactly make their case look any stronger. This would be the point where you would at least attempt to get an hearsay objection in there, but whatever.
Yes, but it was outside of school and it was only one time.
Move to strike. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. No actions off the school campus are at issue here.
Denied.
This leaves them with no options to save Grace's fate. Well, one option. The defense lawyer decides to pull a full Dan's funeral from Big Brother on Grace when Grace is testifying on the stand.
But in this game, you'll never earn my trust back. You know what you did. And in this game, you're dead to me. So don't come to me and ask about it because it's over.
I think it's time that we stop pretending that we can trust a person like this to serve in a public capacity. In the name of tolerance and diversity, I say we destroy her.
We never get any logical explanation for why this works, but almost immediately after this happens, hooray! Grace is found not guilty. He reveals to her that it was just a ploy to make the jury sympathetic for her, and that he couldn't have told her ahead of time because he wanted her reactions to be real, which is actually something that Dan told Danielle again in Dan's funeral.
Can you at least give me a forewarning next time?
No, because then you wouldn't cry.
I'm sorry. I couldn't tell you. Had to come as a surprise, otherwise the jury wouldn't have been swayed by your reactions.
Why a movie based on our legal system is drawing inspiration from CBS's Big Brother, who's to say, really? But as we set up for God's Not Dead 3, there is one more kick in the balls plot-wise this movie had to do, right as I thought I was almost done. Apparently, the government has issued subpoenas for multiple area reverends. They want their last 4 months of sermons delivered to the government. Why are they doing this? Stop asking questions. Just have faith in the magnanimous screenwriters. It's really never explained. I'm going to explain it to you in a few minutes as we get to God's Not Dead 3, but who cares? Let's just move on. The movie ends in a post-credit scene with Reverend Dave getting arrested because he refused to turn in his sermons earlier in the movie. And that's it. We're done with God's Not Dead 2, thank God. This movie left so many questions and so little answers. I feel like a serf in Central Europe in the 1200s, just being completely confused in my all-Latin Catholic Mass, not knowing what's happening as my priest reads from the Bible. I'll truly never know what's actually happening because some religious guy has determined I don't get to know. In the case of the serf, it was because of the Pope. In my case, it was screenwriters Chuck Konzelman and Carrie Solomon. God's Not Dead 2 is, in my opinion, the most stupid movie out of the entire quartet, because it takes everything that the first movie did wrong and doubles down and somehow gets even worse. While the first at least attempted to try to tie up loose ends with its plot lines, this one is a jumbled mess. Multiple scenes felt completely out of place, and multiple plot lines felt like they were conceived by drunk Christian aliens who somehow managed to get the Holy Bible on their alien app store. And I kind of danced around it a little bit, but having the conclusion to your legal procedural movie be the defense attorney gets mad and yells at his client and is really mean to her, and therefore the jury feels bad for her and decides that she's not guilty, that's something a third grader would write. Now you may be asking, how would a third grader have any conception of what court is? Don't be silly. Their parents are getting a divorce, and they had to take the stand to testify as to which parent bought them better toys. It was the dad, by the way, but he's just trying to make up for the fact that he torpedoed the marriage by having an affair. Anyway, we're a little over halfway done, and now we're on to God's Not Dead 3, or God's Not Dead, A Light in Darkness. I'll leave how much money this movie made at the end, but this movie, in many ways, is by far the greatest departure from the franchise that we've gotten yet. Harold Kronk, funny name, the person who directed the first two movies, is out, as well as the screenwriters, and this movie was written and directed by Michael Mason. And doing some very basic fact-finding, because the actual movie itself is pretty unclear, it was kind of loosely based on some true events. Loosely. A lot of churches were getting their sermons subpoenaed because under the Johnson Amendment, if you are a tax-exempt organization, you cannot advocate for certain political candidates or participate in political campaign activities. And churches in America, for the most part, are tax-exempt organizations. And maybe you actually think this makes sense because there is a line between just doing the regular pulpit stuff and being in violation of federal law. But in real life, almost every single subpoena was canceled, so I don't know what the people in God's Not Dead 3 are even complaining about because they won. Well, they didn't win in this movie because there very much were subpoenas and they very much were served. We open up with Reverend Dave in jail in his little jumpsuit because, again, in the second movie, he had refused to comply with the subpoena. This causes, somehow, a whole controversy because the church is on the land of a college, and the college wants to get rid of the church to build a new student center. Pave paradise to put up a parking lot, as they say, or in this case, paved a nice historic church to put up a building where you can go get Starbucks and frozen yogurt. Without ever really explaining it, Reverend Dave is now controversial, which doesn't really make any sense. I mean, eventually he's going to get there because he's going to just start fighting students, but at the beginning of the movie, it really doesn't make any sense. Like, he's controversial because he got arrested. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And you know what else doesn't make any sense? That a state school in Arkansas wants to get rid of their church. The central dramatic underpinning of this movie asks you to buy into two assumptions. Number one, that this school has no other existing land that they can't either buy or use to build a student center, which doesn't really make sense because I don't know if you've ever been to Arkansas, but it basically looks like this. And two, the fact that a state school in Arkansas actually has a student body that wants to get rid of a church. Newsflash, idiot, people who are religious still go to college. Even in my northern private university, there was a church on campus and numerous religious organizations. And you know what the atheists did? Nothing. They didn't go to church. The biggest inconvenience you would run into is when they would come up to you on the street and ask, hey, do you want to go to church on Sunday? And I'd only have 4 seconds to come up with a polite yet witty non sequitur in order to, complete that interaction. Like, oh, I can't go to church on Easter. I gotta help the Easter bunny with the eggs. I only had 4 seconds. Be gentle to me. But what if I told you that this movie, despite having a plot that is incredibly far-fetched and almost insulting, is actually the best movie in the entire franchise? We'll get to that, and it's true. But first, let's talk about the murder arson. Keaton, played by Samantha Boscarino, and Adam, played by Emmy Award-winning actor and somebody who is both 20 and 40 at the same time, Mike Manning, are dating. But their faith causes tension. Or rather, the faith of one of them causes tension and the other is an atheist. Stop me if you've heard this one before. Adam, in drunken frustration, throws a brick through Reverend Dave's church, starting what could only be considered as a Rube Goldberg-esque coincidence that leads to a murder. Because the brick hits a gas pipe and starts a gas leak in this church. It's not going to end well. Reverend Jude, played by Benjamin Onyango, goes to go check it out. And I haven't really talked a lot about Reverend Jude as a character, but he's pretty integral to the series, at least insofar as he is in a lot of scenes. He's been a fairly pronounced part of this movie by being relentlessly positive, super devout, probably the most positive and most devout person in the entire franchise, and he's got a great bromance with Reverend Dave. Anyway, he goes down to the basement where, unbeknownst to him, there is a gas leak to go check it out. And when he pulls the light, which is a little bit broken, there's a huge explosion, the church catches on fire, and he gets killed. Yeah, 10 minutes in, we're killing who, in the God's Not Dead cinematic universe, is basically a franchise character. This is like another third installment, Saints Row 3, killing off Johnny Gat 15 minutes into the start of the game. Except, unlike Saints Row 3, this is actually a pretty interesting narrative choice.
Right on. I'll see you in Stone.
It immediately thrusts you into a Game of Thrones-esque, oh my gosh, what's gonna happen next type headspace. Is Martin getting thrown out the moon door? Is Kevin Sorbo coming back as a White Walker? Is Josh Wheaton the prince that was promised? I'm entirely joking, but Josh does make an appearance back in this movie. He's not super relevant.
Damn, so he got into law school and he left?
Josh, we have no money.
He should have. You need a lawyer now. You should have stayed.
It's not that easy. Seems like you're the one much is being asked of this time.
Ooh, callback.
But he is here, so I feel compelled to note it, and I thought it was nice. It is fun to see these legacy characters. But seriously, it is a powerful choice to, 10 minutes into your movie, kill off a fan-favorite character, because it immediately intensifies the emotional stakes for Reverend Dave, who, up to this point, has really not been in the center of any of the narratives for any of the movies at this point. As Reverend Dave is having a crisis of faith, the college, even though their motivations are stupid, are going to take advantage of this and move to try to eminent domain and get rid of the church so they can get their student center established. We also learn that Dave has a huge personal and familial connection to this church, so he drives up to Chicago to enlist the help of his estranged brother Pierce in an attempt to legally defend himself and keep the church in his hands. If all of this is starting to sound at least somewhat interesting to you, well, I'll be damned. 5 hours into the marathon, we finally have the inklings of a decent movie. Pierce Hill, played by John Corbett, who won a Golden Globe for his work in Sex and the City, is, this is not a question in my mind, the most well-written character in the entire franchise, and it's not close. He's Dave's brother, and guess what? He's an atheist character who's not completely deranged. Almost every single scene with him and Dave interacting is, and this was a real shock to me, pleasant to watch. The two joke about each other, care about each other, laugh with each other, talk about theology, but they do it in a way that it's clear that Dave isn't trying to convert Pierce because he knows it's not going to work, and it allows them to have much better interactions and, frankly, much more authentic and realistic interactions.
It's okay, I'm his attorney.
Congratulations, and I'm a Mets fan. Now, move
Go
back
Mets!
or I call the cops.
Already called.
And Pierce fights throughout this movie pretty hard to save the church, and you genuinely come away from these interactions not feeling like the movie is trying to preach and put a message. It's just depicting these two brothers who, like millions of other Americans, are at odds with each other at their faith, but can still care about each other. It's refreshing and honest, and that's something I have not been able to use at all to describe anything I've seen in the past 4.5 to 5 hours. Of course, my praise has to stop somewhere, because Adam admits via anonymous text that he was the one who got the church burned down, causing Reverend Dave to attack him in front of a bunch of cameras. Pierce sees this, sees that his brother is crazy, and decides to give up entirely. Because, you know, we had an atheist character, but eventually we had to have him end up as a disappointment, right? But Reverend Dave, alongside the family of Reverend Jude, admit that they want mercy for Adam and get the criminal charges dropped, as well as admitting to everybody that they are turning over their church and their land to the university so that they can build their student center, and then the assumption being that in the student center there will be a place for their church. This, to be quite honest, was one of the most shocking things I've watched recently in any movie. Especially given the context of what I'd watched in the 2 movies that I had just seen. Like, this is such a departure, not just from those 2 movies, but from Christian cinema in general. A genre that relishes on cartoon triumphs of its heroes over the evil forces of secularism has Reverend Dave showing mercy, accepting to his enemy that you have won. I will give you the land of my church. It's frankly a lot more accurate to Christianity than a lot of the stories you see in Christian cinema. You know, didn't that fellow named Jesus say, turn the other cheek and whatnot? So while the movie wasn't good, it still suffers from the same problems as the other 2, a bloated ensemble, poor writing, poor cinematography, a Christian persecution complex. It easily was the best out of all 3 of them. And it's probably the only movie that I could honestly in good faith recommend to somebody who's not a religious zealot and say, you might kind of not hate it. So, of course, naturally, it grossed almost nothing at the box office and was met with negative reviews from its target audience. It grossed $7.6 million on a budget that was probably around there, so it really didn't make that much money at all, which naturally means that God's Not Dead 4 is going to be nothing like God's Not Dead 3. We're back with more Christian fear-mongering slop for our final movie of the video. Yes! God's Not Dead, We the People, and with a name like that, you know it's going to be dog shit. I really thought this would be the last time we ever saw God's Not Dead on the big screen because it only grossed $1.2 million, a mere fraction of what it was grossing with the previous movies. But in an attempt to course correct, we do see a bit of a revamp, although in this case, the revamp is more of a regression to the mean. Reverend Dave is now an advisor to a group of homeschooling parents who all send their kid to one collectively run homeschool. It's almost like as I'm describing this, it kind of reminds you of a regular school district, doesn't it? Maybe this whole homeschooling thing, maybe we should try regular school. And look, no shade to homeschooling, but I do think it's funny to essentially disavow all of the innovations of modern education, like having different grades for students of different ages, and not having them all in one room. It's not 1850 anymore. We no longer live on the American frontier. It's okay to move past the philosophy of let's have everybody in a schoolhouse, except in this case, it's not even like they're in a nice wooden schoolhouse. They're just in somebody's living room. An agent of the state makes an unannounced visit as they're doing a theology lesson, talking about Noah's Ark, and they're talking about it less in a way of like, this is a fable that didn't actually happen to instill moral lessons, and more of a, that's in the Bible, so it's real. Naturally, this agent does not like that. The government employee then goes on to recommend this case to a judge, where the judge tells the parents, you guys have got 1 week to either improve your educational standards, which is never really something they even consider, by the way, or enroll your kids into public school.
I used to go to a human school where everyone was the same. Now I go to an animal school because lion's my last name. My gym partner is a monkey. Monkey.
And if you don't do that, you're going to get a fine of $1,000 a day. This movie, and this is really what I object to the most, seems to earnestly believe that homeschools should not be subject to any regulation whatsoever. This is insane, by the way. Homeschooling can be done well. I'm not arguing that that's not true, but what I am arguing is that homeschooling can easily be used as a tool to facilitate abuse if parents have a mind to do so. And that's why it's important to have regulation. And frankly, in a lot of places in modern day America, there really isn't a lot of regulation to begin with. So I'm not sure why this movie exists. They're complaining about something that doesn't even really happen. We should have standards, and I don't think that's a crazy thing to say. The parents of this movie, though, and Reverend Dave disagree, and they head to Washington, D.C. to make their minds known in front of a congressional committee. Yeah, we have now gone backwards from a milquetoast legal procedural to now testimony in front of a congressional committee. Riveting stuff. This, by the way, doesn't make any sense at all, because they're all in legal trouble that has nothing to do with the bill being discussed before this committee. There's a point where the chairman even goes up to them and all smugly asks, "Did you really think this was gonna change anything?" And they're all like, yeah, we thought we did. We thought this would fix our issue. Like, maybe it's not a good thing that the people who are supposedly teaching our children don't know anything about the legal system or about civics in general. Just putting it out there. Their dramatic speeches in the halls of the Capitol mean precisely jack shit to the current legal case that they are facing back home. But what ultimately saves them from this legal case? Why, a horny homeschool teenager, of course. In what is probably the least interesting B-plot in any of these movies, bar none, one of the high school age kids from the homeschool buys a car from a girl, and he becomes infatuated with the girl, and they do a little, like, you know, teenage romance, and it's one of the least interesting things I've ever seen. It's very Hallmark movie-esque. You've seen it 10 million times, and I believe their, like, whole conclusion of them going to prom together is resolved in the credits, so the movie itself doesn't even really care that much. But it turns out this girl's mom is the judge presiding over the case of the homeschool parents. And as a fun addition to that, the judge is also Judge Jeanine Piero, who is taking a break from her normal bread and butter of wine mom racism to try acting in a Christian movie. I will say though, I imagine her cameo/performance will age a lot better than the Duck Dynasty people who you've probably already forgotten about. Anyways, the daughter basically begs her mom, the judge, to overturn the decision, and that works. So the parents are fine. But in the halls of the Capitol, we learn that Reverend Dave is so dissatisfied with the political process, he even gives us a Mr. Burcham-esque speech as the entire viewing audience, which I guess there is a viewing audience for these congressional committees, they're all clapping. I mean, it's supposed to be like journalists and whatever. They're all clapping because he's so awesome, and yeah. But the stage has been set for the political outsider Reverend Dave to run for Congress in the 5th movie, which I am absolutely dreading. I'm sure it's going to be insufferable. But we do also get a couple fun legacy characters. Martin is back, but he's mostly in this movie just excited to go to Washington, D.C. and take pictures. And we also see Aisha, the person who was a Muslim in the first movie and was kicked out of her house by her dad. She gets in a car accident and is sent to the hospital, where her dad then is immediately feeling bad about himself, goes to see her in the hospital, and reconciles their relationship. In fact, he even becomes a Christian. So, kids, it really is that easy. If you don't have a good relationship with your parents, if you ever get in a car accident, everything will be better. They'll even convert to Christianity. It really is that easy. Obviously, this section of the video is a lot shorter than the ones before it, and that's not just because these movies have gone from 120 minutes to 90, it's because God's Not Dead 4 has almost nothing interesting to say. It dabbles in a lot more of the contemporary conservative political movement, particularly in regards to homeschooling, than any of the 3 movies before it did, but if I'm having to describe which strain of contemporary politics your movie happens to believe, your movie is failing. You've created a very boring movie that wants to preach rather than depict compelling characters. And while all the movies obviously are trying to preach Christianity, this is the first movie that really dabbles in politics, and it ends up being pure political garbage, complete with Ronald Reagan movie. Watch that review if you haven't. And dramatic patriotic montages of Washington, D.C. and our monuments and our dead soldiers. Oh my god. Okay, we're almost done. Patrick. We are almost done. Unfortunately for me, this franchise appears to be heading in the wrong direction, which bodes quite poorly for God's Not Dead 5. I'm tired. Not just because this is the longest video I've ever made in my entire life for this channel, and otherwise, not just because I've literally never watched 4 movies back to back to back to back in my entire life, but I'm tired for a deeper reason than that. I'm tired because the gimmick of all these movies is so totally and completely uninspired. It's fine to watch one Christian movie, mock it, and move on, but when I've watched 7 hours worth of Christian cinema, been filming here for over 2 hours, and have written a script that in total is about a 1/5 of a novel, you really start to get some greater insight. You realize just how utterly devoid of creativity this entire franchise truly is. I don't want to call these cash grabs because that would require them, particularly the 3rd and 4th movies, to be a lot more successful than they actually are, but it's clear that these filmmakers did not set out to create art or create anything that actually challenges anything. They're creating movies that depict a fabricated world, one where Christianity is both always under attack, yet always comes out the victor on the other side. And newsflash, we do not live in ancient Rome anymore. Emperor Hadrian is not cracking down on Christians and putting them in the Colosseum. That's just not the world we live in. America is a country for everybody, and a country that prioritizes religious liberty for every religion, including Christianity. But America is also a capitalist country, and there's a pretty big market for selling people the stories that they want to hear. One that is more cartoon than reality, and completely spiritually hollow except for a few absent-minded quotations from scripture. One where evil atheists always lose, sometimes even being hit by cars, unless they pledge fealty to a degree that you feel is sufficient, in which case you'll give them and then cure their cancer. And one where, ultimately, God's not dead, he's surely alive. He's living on the inside, roaring like a lion. He's roaring. Okay, I'm sorry for that. I think religion can be an immensely positive and uplifting thing for people. Unfortunately, the God's Not Dead franchise of movies do neither. But that's gonna do it for me, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. This video took so long, I'm actually starting to lose my voice. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and comment. This video took so long. So much of my sanity, as I said at the beginning. Leave a comment down below. If you watched any of these movies, are you going to? Are you gonna see the new one? Let me know your thoughts. What do you think about Christian cinema in general? Do you think these movies have any merit? What do you think about a movie that's more concerned with its ideology than actually being a good movie? But as always, my name is Patrick. My friends call me Pat, and that's gonna do it for me. I can't even get my closing right. Please subscribe. This is it for the video.